Hey everybody, hi, welcome back to the Cairo class 101. In today's episode, we'll be working on three major things, which is built-ins, variables, and conditionals. So let's get started. So right at the first, right over here, the built-ins output function. First, it's very important for us to understand what are built-ins, and it's very simple. Built-ins are very similar to functions that we write on our code, similar to that, like the add square function that we wrote in the previous tutorial. However, instead of writing them and calling them at a later point in the code, the built-ins are inscribed directly in the CPU so that they're extremely performant. Now, in this case, we're using the output built-in. Rather, what it basically means is very, very analogous to the stdio.h of C, which basically does the standard output and taking input from the user. Now, coming to making use of this output built-in that we have, we are importing a specific function called as serialized word. And the use case of serialized word is really very simple. What serialized word does is, let's say if you're outputting this value z, then the serialized word basically takes this value z and it just merges that with the output pointer. So what is a pointer? Because in case if you don't have the C or C++ background, or in case, let's say if you're someone from JavaScript or Python, you might rather be wondering what the heck is pointer, right? So pointers are very simple. It's just like an address. So it's basically the address where I can find the value of this specific one. So in this case, let's say if the Cairo compiler wants to know what value to print out to the user, then the serialized word will basically have the address of the value that it has to print out. So let's say if you get selected as maybe the president of a country, then in order for them to come and send a card to you, they need to know the address where you live. So in this case, the Cairo compiler is maybe the presidential community, which is sending the card to you, and maybe the address is the pointer and the value is you. Now it's as simple as that. So the serialized word is just going to print out that specific thing here. So if I run this command, I'm just going to get the output 512, which is basically the value of z. Now, coming on to another very important part, which is rather, to understand the next part of this tutorial, which is rather variables. Let's first understand by learning about, what is the use of having something like let, or what is the case of using temp_var, temporary variable, or maybe even using local. So just to start with something like the starting principle, which is let. What let does is, let's say if there is 3 y's, then it just replaces that. So in this case, what it is basically going to do is have 3 x's. So for every y that is there, it's going to have it's going to just replace it with x. Now, the biggest problem with this thing is that it makes things very much, a little bit much more resource heavy, because in this case, if you ideally think there is at least 9 multiplications, because I need to first multiply x by x, then do the multiplication again, and go on so forth. So in order to understand this on a much detailed level, let's just go and click on this debug icon, and immediately you would be able to see this output pointer, which shows the value as 37. Now that's majorly the address where it is lying at. So let's say if you just majorly go through that, then we get the value of x, y, z, but that's not where it ends. So let's see how many variables it takes. So if you first see, as I mentioned, it does the x times x, which is basically 4. And then comes the 8, which is majorly taking the multiplication of all the 3 together, because it already knows the value of x times x, which is again 4. And then it's basically taking the 4 and then it's multiplying it with 2, which gives the complete value of this entity, which is 8. Now it's going to do the same thing again, because all these things are, in this braces. So it's going to again do 4 and again do 8, multiply all the things together. Then it will again, it will basically multiply both of these things, because it knows the value of these two like entities. So that's majorly what 64 is, basically the product of this, which is 8, and the product of this, which is again 8, which gives out 64. Now again comes to another very important part of the code, where it will again, like do this 2 times 2, which is 4, and then 4 times 2, which is 8. So let's see that too. So 4 and then 8, and then now, as you correctly pointed out, it's just going to take this 8 and multiply it with the 64. So the next one would be basically 512, and that's it. So we actually got the result. So this is majorly how it goes around when you use the let variable. But let's say if we actually use the temporary variable instead of actually using let. So in case if we are using temp_var, then it will actually just take 4 multiplications, because what would essentially happen is it will take the product of x times x, which is 4, and then it will do the product of x times x times x, which is 8. So just as simple as that. Then it will come here and it will multiply the 8 with 8, which is 64, and then 64 times 8, which is 512. So it's just 4 multiplications, and let's quickly go through that. So now it's coming here, and then the x value. So now we have to multiply that. So it's going to give 4 temporary variable, as you can see there. And now again, as you pointed out, 8, because it just multiplied this. Now it has to find the value for this. So next go, we get 64, which is majorly, 8 times 8, which is 64. And now it has to do the 64 times 8. So that will be 512. So, in this case, instead of doing the multiplication 9 times, we reduced it to just 4 times by using the temporary variable. So it just, did the multiplication on this level itself, and it just did 3 things. It's much resource, it uses very less amount of resources, which is pretty good. Now coming on to another type, which is, called as local. So something like this. It's very similar to, the temporary variable. So you won't see any difference at all, in fact. So it's just going to take again 4 multiplications to do the same thing. So 4, 8, 64, and 512. It's just the same thing again. But in this case, it just took 4 times to do this. Now another very important part of this tutorial, as we also talked about, is to understand why do we exactly need temporary variables. And the next most important part is to rather understand about what is conditionals. So let's start with conditionals first. So just let's write something. So this function, what it's going to do is it's just going to check if the number output, if the output is basically 512, and in case if the number was 512, then it's basically going to return a 1, or it is going to return a 2. Now let's maybe call this function maybe conditional, and let's say let's call a variable. Again, these curly braces are important because it's a pointer, and conditional, and let's just say z equals. Okay, so in this case the value of z is going to be z, so let's put the equal to z. Now the next important thing that we need to do is to write the function conditional. So let's do func conditional, and here we need to have z, and then the z will be outputting z. So in this case, just to again save variable, we're just using just to save memory, we're just using z again. Now what we have to do now is just to, if z equals 512, we have to return one, and else we have to return 2. And it's also very important to end your if statement and then go and end the function again. So now in order to make sure that we're doing things correct, let's go and print out A. So yeah, let's just try to run this thing, and voila, it worked perfectly, and we got the output as 1. So this is majorly how you write like your if else statements. And you can also you can also actually replicate an else if with the use of this as well. So let's say if you also wanted to check if let's say if Z was 514, then you could have just put another if on the top and said if Z equals 514, then return maybe 4 or something like that. So that's something like that you can also do. Now, coming on to the next important part, which I basically mentioned to you about, what is the use of using local? Like temporary variable is also going to help me do the same thing. Now, one thing that can be very, very useful while you're using local is, for example, let's consider this conditional case. Now, instead of returning 1 and 2, what if we return something like, let's say, z times c, which is basically z cubed. Now, when I'm basically going to do something like this, and if I'm going to click on run, then it's going to give me this issue saying that reference A was revoked. And the reason why this is basically throwing this error is that in order for me to basically use these components and do the arithmetic, I need to declare them as a local variable rather than declaring them as something like let. Because as we mentioned earlier, what let is basically doing is just replacing the terms. So it's very essential for us to establish the local keyword in here. And as established also before, while we're using local, so this is just like a short way of using it. So you can be like let local A and do the same thing. And also another very important thing is that you have to use this allocate locals this method. So just go and uncomment this, and we can just run the same thing again, and it should work flawlessly without any issue. So that's it for today, guys. Hope we meet in the next tutorial, and let's have an amazing time then. Thank you so much again. Looking forward.